Never judge a person by their appearance. What happened between this boy and this woman will make you rethink everything. Imagine an ordinary scenario, but one that has the power to change lives. A crowded bus, a muggy afternoon, the daily grind. In the middle of the crowd, a 16-year-old boy, dressed in simple clothes, stands. His eyes, tired from studying so hard to change his reality, watch the rocking of the bus. Suddenly, he sees something that makes him take an action that would change his life forever. It was a hot summer afternoon, with the sun beating down on the city streets. The bus was packed, as usual, at 6 p.m., and the stuffy feeling was almost unbearable. The sound of conversations, the creaking of the wheels, and the constant rocking of the vehicle formed a mixture of chaos. But for the boy, it was all part of the routine. He was no longer bothered by the noise or the discomfort of the journey. After all, he had learned to deal with it a long time ago. He was only 16, but he seemed to carry the weight of an adult on his shoulders. His old, worn-out sneakers, his backpack that seemed bigger than he was, and his simple second-hand clothes were not what defined who he was. It wasn't his appearance or the fact that he was a skinny black kid with a serious countenance that made him valuable. He knew that, in many places, people saw him as just another invisible boy, someone of little importance. And as much as this bothered him, he had no choice but to move on, facing one day after another. His dream of going to college and getting out of a life of financial hardship drove him on, but the road there seemed to be full of stones. On the bus, he tried to read his chemistry book, one of the subjects that gave him the most trouble. But, as usual, everyone's attention seemed to be focused on the chaos around them. People were tired, bored by the heat and the hours of work. He, for his part, was trying to concentrate on the numbers and formulas, looking for an escape from the academic world which, for some reason, made him feel more at ease. He was used to being ignored, to getting lost in the crowd of sweaty, impatient bodies. The problem wasn't the noise or the discomfort of the journey, but the feeling of being trapped in an endless cycle. He knew that life could be better, but he couldn't see how he could get out of it. That's when she walked in, the pregnant woman. She looked no older than 30, but the signs of tiredness were evident. Her face was marked by the weight of exhaustion, and her large, visible belly made her movements seem slow and heavy. Sweat trickled down her forehead as she climbed the steps of the bus with difficulty. People watched her for a second, but then looked away, returning to whatever they were doing. The boy, on the other hand, couldn't take his eyes off her. Something in her expression touched him deeply. He sensed the pain in her every movement, the weakness, the effort to stay upright in a cramped, airless environment. The woman held onto the railing with both hands, but was visibly struggling against the pressure of her own exhaustion. She tried to look around, perhaps for somewhere to sit, but the seats were full. There was no space left, and the pressure of standing there seemed to increase by the second. The boy realized that she was in trouble, but, like most of the people around him, he hesitated. Was she really in need of help? Should he offer to give up his seat? He didn't know, but a part of him already had the answer. Something inside him pushed him to act. He looked away and realized that no one else was willing to offer their seat. He looked once more at the woman, who was already starting to sway involuntarily, trying to keep her balance. Her hands were sweaty, and he could see that she was beginning to lose her strength. He thought of his own mother, who had always taught him to be polite, to respect others, but also to be brave when necessary. What touched him most was the fact that no one seemed to care. The bus was packed, but people were just staring at their cell phone screens, lost in their own worlds. The boy felt a silent anger rise up inside him. How could they be so insensitive? How could people be so absorbed in their own lives that they didn't see a pregnant woman struggling to stand, dragging herself along in the muggy heat of the bus? He watched the woman's face once more, and something in her gaze made up his mind. He didn't know what compelled him to act, but he knew he couldn't go on being just another indifferent passenger. With a decisive movement, he got up from his seat and, without saying a word, walked over to her. His hand touched the railing where she was holding on, and before she could understand what was happening, he said, "Please, ma'am, you can sit down. I'll stand." The woman looked at him in surprise, as if she hadn't understood the kindness. She was so used to being ignored that she didn't expect anyone to care. Her eyes sparkled for a moment, and with an expression of gratitude, she sat down, making a careful movement to accommodate her belly. The boy remained standing, watching her for a moment. He didn't want to draw attention to himself, but he felt a sense of accomplishment. He didn't know what else he could do, but something inside him told him that what he had just done was important. The heat was still unbearable, the noise still deafening, but he felt that this small gesture of generosity had changed something inside him. He felt that he had made a difference, however small, and that gave him a sense of peace. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew that, at that moment, he was part of something bigger than himself. Something more significant than a simple gesture on a crowded bus. However, the journey was far from over. He didn't know it, but that act of kindness, which seemed simple and insignificant, would begin to trigger a series of events that would change his life in ways he could never have imagined. The bus continued its journey, swaying from side to side, but the feeling in the air seemed different now. The boy was still standing next to the pregnant woman, trying to keep his composure without showing any kind of tiredness, although the muscles in his legs were beginning to complain. But something was heavier on his chest than physical discomfort. It was as if he had taken the first step towards change, not just for himself, but for the world around him. He felt strange, as if he had committed a small transgression against the indifference that dominated the city streets. That decision to give up his seat, to be kind when everyone else was immersed in their own problems, seemed to have something deeper. And what he didn't know was that this simple act of kindness was about to be the turning point for something he would never have imagined. The journey seemed to drag on, and the heat was making everything even more uncomfortable. The boy looked at the empty seat where he had been sitting, but the woman was now comfortable, breathing more calmly. She had lowered her head and seemed to be trying to relax, her eyes closed, but still keeping her posture, worried about her belly and the pressure that pregnancy brought. Something in her face caught the boy's attention. He saw exhaustion, but he also saw a silent strength that wasn't so visible. That woman was carrying life inside her, and he felt a small wave of empathy, perhaps even a little shame for complaining so much about his own situation. He, a simple boy with no resources, complained about life, about the daily struggle to survive, but that human being in front of him was carrying something that transcended the daily challenges. She was carrying the future, and the weight of that was visible in her every move. Although the boy tried to concentrate on his own story, he couldn't help but notice the woman's reflection in his own life. It was impossible not to see that he, like her, was also trying to fight against a system that often left him on the sidelines. But unlike the pregnant woman, he hadn't yet found his purpose, his true motivation. The woman, as difficult as her journey was at that moment, was giving birth to a new life, while he, as much as he dreamed of a better life, was still stuck in a rut, not knowing where to start his own personal revolution. He felt that, although his gesture was small, he was beginning to understand that perhaps it was time for something bigger to happen in his life, something that would demand more of him. It was as if that simple act had unveiled a new layer of his existence, something he hadn't known he needed. He knew that something was about to change. When the bus made its next stop, the pregnant woman stood up with difficulty, holding her belly, but not before giving him a grateful look. She seemed to be making a decision, and the boy, as if driven by curiosity, couldn't help watching her every move. She approached his bench, where he was still standing, and in an unexpected move, pulled something out of her bag. It was a folded piece of paper, which she held out to him with a smile, but a smile that carried something he couldn't decipher. The boy, surprised and confused, took the paper, and the woman quietly went back to her seat. He didn't know what to think. What did she want with that? Why a note? With his hand still trembling slightly, he opened the note, hoping perhaps to find some ordinary thank you, a simple expression of gratitude. What he found, however, was something that made him freeze for a moment. The words on the paper were written hastily, in a handwriting that looked nervous, but the words were clear. I saw your kindness. You don't know me, but I know who you are. I saw something in you, something that many don't see, something that goes beyond difficulties and limitations. Your life is about to change. If you follow the right path, you'll be much more than you realize. There is something great waiting for you. Don't let circumstances define who you are. The best is yet to come. The boy read the note once, twice, 3 times, trying to understand what those words meant. He looked at the woman again, but she was staring out of the window, as if she didn't know he was reading those words. His heart beat faster, not just because of the note, but because of the feeling that something extraordinary was about to happen. He didn't know what to do with that note, but something inside him felt that he couldn't just ignore it. He had been touched in a way he couldn't understand, as if those words had been written for him, as if that woman knew something he didn't yet understand about his own destiny. What disturbed him most, however, was the fact that he had never shown any signs of wanting anything grander. He had never thought about his future in such a transformative way. With every bump of the bus, he felt the tension rise, as if the journey was no longer just a simple trip home, but a journey to something more. He knew that the note, that simple piece of paper, was a sign that perhaps his life wasn't as insignificant as he thought. Perhaps he really was capable of achieving something great, something beyond his current condition. But what exactly was he supposed to do with it? How could he turn that gesture of kindness into something greater? He knew that somehow that pregnant woman had not only given him a note, but also the key to something he had never imagined. A key that would lead him down a completely new path. The bus made another stop, and the boy was so engrossed in the note that he barely noticed the movement around him. His eyes were fixed on the words, trying to understand the message that seemed to come from a much deeper place than he could have imagined. What did she mean by "the best is yet to come"? What had he done to deserve these words, so full of hope and meaning? The pressure in his chest increased as the words echoed in his mind. He had never considered his future so intensely, but now it felt like his whole being was being pulled in a new direction, towards an unknown but palpable destination. He didn't know how to react, and at the same time, he couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. He looked again at the pregnant woman. She was looking out, but her expression was calm, as if she knew something was unfolding, something he still couldn't fully understand. He wanted to talk to her, to ask about the note, about what she meant, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the fear of looking foolish. Perhaps it was the feeling that this moment was not to be interrupted. Something inside him told him that this wasn't the time to ask questions. He needed to wait for the answers to come by themselves, in a way he couldn't predict. The bus continued on its way, but the boy was no longer focused on the journey. He was focused on just one thing, the words on the note. He didn't know how, but he felt deep down in his soul that his life was about to change. He had given a simple seat to a pregnant woman, but now he felt as if he had taken a step towards something much bigger. It was as if that small act of kindness was the key to unlocking a future that he had never imagined, but which somehow seemed to have always been there, waiting for him. As the bus approached its stop, the boy felt an urgent need to act, to do something with that growing feeling inside him. He needed to understand what the woman was trying to show him. He needed to find out what lay beyond that message, because he knew it wasn't just about him and her. It was about something much bigger. Something that involved his whole life, his choices, his destiny. It was as if everything he had experienced up to that point had been a simple prelude to what was to come. He didn't know if it was coincidence or fate, but what he did know was that he couldn't let that moment pass unnoticed. Suddenly, he had the feeling that things weren't going to happen by themselves. He had to do something, take action, start changing his life now. It was as if, by taking that simple seat, he had taken the first step towards the transformation he had wanted so much but had never known how to initiate. The bus stopped abruptly, interrupting his thoughts. The boy stood up automatically, looking again at the pregnant woman, her hands still on the ticket. He needed to say goodbye to her somehow. He needed to show her that this gesture hadn't just been a formality. He was grateful, more grateful than he could express, and he knew it wasn't just that she had given him the note, but that she had been the catalyst for something much deeper inside him. But before he could take another step, something happened. The woman got up from the bench with difficulty, and with an almost silent look, she found him. Their eyes met, and the boy felt as if time had slowed down. He didn't know what was happening, but something in that gaze seemed to have an immense weight, as if she was recognizing something in him that he didn't yet understand. She approached him and, in one smooth movement, placed her hand on his shoulder. "I know you'll understand one day," she said in a voice that was calm and quiet, but carried a deep intensity. "The goodness you so always comes back to you, in a way you would never have imagined." Her words echoed inside him, reverberating in a way he couldn't explain. They weren't just words of consolation. They were words of wisdom, of something he was about to discover. And for an instant, he felt a wave of clarity. Something lit up inside him, as if the missing piece was finally falling into place. He was on the right path. Even if he didn't know what that path was, he knew he was heading in the right direction. He had taken the first step, and now it was time to act, to turn that small gesture of kindness into a real change in his life. The woman smiled softly, as if she knew that her words had found the right place inside him. Without saying another word, she walked towards the bus door. The boy stood there motionless, absorbing every word, every gesture, every look. He knew that this moment would change his life forever. He didn't know what would happen next, but he had a deep feeling that something very big was about to happen. And the moment the bus left again, with the woman disappearing through the door, the boy felt a wave of gratitude, not just for that moment, but for everything that was about to happen. He knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that he had just started a journey that would take him to places he had never imagined. Fate had touched him, and he was ready to move on with a new perspective, a new understanding of what it meant to be human, of the power of kindness and change. He took a step forward. And for the first time in his life, he felt that the future was in his hands. The boy stood holding the note, his fingers trembling slightly. The woman, with her silent departure, had left something more than words behind. She had left a seed of hope, a light at the end of a tunnel he barely knew existed. He felt deep down in his soul that he would never be the same again. The simple act of giving up his seat had triggered something that went far beyond what he had expected, something he could never have anticipated. With his eyes fixed on the note, he realized that, in a way, life always finds ways to guide us, even when we think we're lost. He didn't know what the next step was, but now he understood that it wasn't about understanding every detail immediately. It was about trusting that by doing good, by acting with kindness, life brings us the answers, even if in unexpected ways. Looking out of the window, the world seemed different. The boy now saw the people around him differently. Each person carried a story, a pain, hope, and he felt as if he had somehow connected with them. He didn't know where his path would lead him, but he felt that by doing good, by offering his best without expecting anything in return, he became part of something bigger. Perhaps it was the invisible force that guides destinies. Perhaps it was something he couldn't fully understand, but somehow he knew he was on the right path. The bus went on, but inside it, the boy felt that his life had just taken a turn. He was ready for what was to come, because now, more than ever, he knew that every little gesture has the power to change the course of a life. Just for those of you who like a good story and have watched to the end, leave your comment below from which city you're watching, and I'll leave a heart in your comment. Bye, and see you in the next video.